It's time for our ESPN Roundtable, checking in on the only game of two teams ranked in the top 25 in the FCS poll this week. The Fighting Hawks of North Dakota come to Missoula to take on the fifth-ranked Montana Grizzlies. Fighting Hawks are number 16 in this week's poll, coming off a nice 50-20 win over Portland State last week. Tom Miller from the Grand Forks Herald, who's covered UND for many years, joins us now. He's joined us on this show before, but Tom, thanks for being back, man. How you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to chat with you. This is always a highlight of this matchup.
What uh what year is this for you covering UND football? It's been a while.
Yeah, so I started out of high school. So I've been covering the team to some extent since 2004. So 21 years, I guess.
Nice, very good. So you've seen a lot of different evolutions and transitioning to Division One, et cetera, et cetera.
Multiple nicknames, multiple
You-
coaches, conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have people settled in with the Fighting Hawks nickname now?
that's a good question. It's always been more of a hockey stronghold than the football side of things. You still hear "Home of the Sioux" at the end of the national anthem, though.
Right, right, right. I'm sure you do for sure. Yeah, it's funny because there was that I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 years when UND was in the Big Sky Conference, and we were writing about them a fair amount at Skyline Sports, but they didn't have a mascot, so you just had to go back and forth. North Dakota, UND, North Dakota, UND. At least from a writer's perspective, having another nickname gives them one more thing to reference them by, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was starting to write green and white just to mix in a they.
No, no doubt. Well, when it comes to now being back in the Missouri Valley, that's been a little while now. So how do you think I guess just describe to people sort of the status and the place that North Dakota holds in that conference. Because at the same time, a great conference, but also you're chasing these two juggernauts that have just sort of dominated the landscape of FCS football in North Dakota State and South Dakota State. So where does UND sit sort of in the current modern era of Missouri Valley Conference football right now?
Yeah, I think even when North Dakota was in the Big Sky, North Dakota was always chasing North Dakota State and South Dakota State. They might not have been in the same conference, but that's who your fan base was going to hold you up against. So from that perspective, that hasn't changed much. What has changed is that, when you're in the Missouri Valley, you play North Dakota State and South Dakota State every year. That can be twofold, from one side of things, that makes it real hard to get to 7 wins. You play a money game, you play NDSU and SDSU, or a lot of years, are you chalking up 3 losses right there before you even roll the football out? That's a tough place to be. And so I think North Dakota right now is just in that second tier of the Missouri Valley Football Conference, where they're kind of jockeying with South Dakota and Southern Illinois, and Youngstown State gets in that mix every once in a while. But North Dakota's vision is never to be North Dakota State and South Dakota State's little brother in that conference, and I think they've put together the facilities and have certain things pointed in the direction to try to accomplish that. But you're aiming for the very top of the heap there. But those schools are awfully close when you're North Dakota.
It might be an unanswerable question, but what is the thing that it could help North Dakota close the gap? Is it a financial thing? Is it a cultural thing? I mean, you could insert different names for different FCS programs here too, right? This is not just a North Dakota thing. They just happen to be, like you said, closer in proximity to those two schools. You could ask the same thing about Montana, Montana State, et cetera. But in your mind, what's the thing that's eluding North Dakota in that sort of arms race?
I think we're starting to see some benefits of North Dakota just finished building some facilities around their indoor practice facility. So they built a $20 million indoor practice facility that went online in like 2016-ish. Um, but they were having a locker room and a weight room, and all the coaches' offices were still in old Memorial Stadium, which was ancient, unsafe, the kind of facility that you avoid sending recruits to. UND finally built this kind of ecosystem where a kid can live in apartments above Old Memorial Stadium, go to coaches meetings in the lower level, that is UND athletics offices. They can walk this tunnel they call the Hawkway to the indoor practice facility, nutrition, weightlifting, get their ankles taped. So the whole thing is set. And in Grand Forks, North Dakota, if you don't have to walk outside a lot of the year, that is a great benefit. I think if facilities needed to take a step forward, and you're starting to see some of that, because when you're North Dakota and you're recruiting from, let's say, Omaha or Minneapolis, you're asking kids to continue up I-29 and go past Brookings, go past Fargo to come to Grand Forks. So you better knock the facilities piece out of the water if you're going to have kids. You're in a geographical hole to begin with, and so you have to go over the top when it comes to everything else you can come over the top on. And I think they're getting there with facilities, and you're seeing that in the 2026 class and somewhat the 2025 class, but that takes some time.
Tom Miller, Grand Forks Herald, joining us here on the ESPN Roundtable. Nuanez now 1029 ESPN Montana, as well as SWX Montana Television and the ESPN MT app. He is on the beat for UND football for the Grand Forks Herald. Um, do you think hockey has an influence on it too? I mean, just because North Dakota has such a strong tradition in hockey and so much success in hockey?
Yeah, that'll always be used against North Dakota on the recruiting trail for sure. And then there's obviously some reality to it. You really see it in basketball when, the other Dakota schools can say, do you really want to go to Grand Forks and be third fiddle because you're going to have hockey, football, and then you're going to be basketball. And so that gets used against North Dakota a lot in basketball. Maybe a little bit less in football, but that's certainly in this NIL world we live in, right? If you have heavy hitters in the financial world, um, hockey is in a difficult place because hockey needs to perform against Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Boston College. So you're talking about schools that have big television contracts on the back end of their programs that can hand out NIL to not only the top end first round NHL draft picks, but just to their whole roster, depending on how you want to roll that out to your athletic department or your student athletes. Um, so, hockey has to be taken care of because it drives the bus in this community and at the university. And yeah, I mean, to some extent, that's a challenge to the football program because there's only so much money to go around in the community the size of Grand Forks.
Yeah, it is just it's so interesting the way that this is all evolved with all of the various different revenue streams you need and all the various different distribution streams you need. On that note, how do you think North Dakota has done just in terms of uh, keeping up, but also just having a plan when it comes to NIL and all the stuff that goes with it?
Yeah, I think Eric Schmidt has come in and really he's preaching a lot of what like, hey, I coached at Washington, like he coached in the national championship game, right? So he's coming back and saying, I coach the guys at the highest level. We put guys in the NFL. You can get there from here. We're going to make sure that we develop guys and can give them a shot at the NFL, and that's why you should stay here. But it's obviously a tough sell. Like if a power program comes calling and a kid gets an opportunity to go play every day in front of 70,000 people, North Dakota's going to have a hard time, just like any other school in the FCS right now.
You mentioned Eric Schmidt. I got to know him a little bit when North Dakota was in the Big Sky Conference because he was the defensive coordinator there at North Dakota for quite some time. I think 5, 6 seasons there on Bubba Schweigert's staff. He's also a UND alum, which I think probably helps connect the dots for people for why he made his way back to North Dakota. But here he is, 2 games into his first year as a head coach. So, what's it been like? Because Bubba Schweigert was there for a while, right? 11 seasons, is that right? That Coach Schweigert was at the helm.
Yeah, it was his first year in 2014, and he was a Division
Yeah,
two defensive coordinator. So he had a long time with UND, and he's now in an athletic administration role,
saw that.
fundraising and those kind of things. So, um, you know, uh, yeah, Eric Schmidt has come in and kind of said a lot of the right things and presented a lot of the right culture. And it's interesting that he's come in and implemented a new defense for a guy who grew up in the 3-4 and coached the 3-4, and now he comes back and says, "Nope, we're playing the 4-2-5."
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I made sure to study up a little bit. I think I even read one of your articles about the defensive scheme change because I didn't want to go in and ask Bobby Hauck about Eric Schmidt's vaunted 3-4 defense and then have him not run it because Bobby Hauck will be the first one to squish you like a bug if you do something like that. So appreciate you on having stories about that. But what is sort of the motivation behind that? Because the 3-4 was very successful under Coach Schmidt and just in general at North Dakota. So what's sort of the motivation behind going to this 4-2-5 hybrid?
Yeah, I think the 3-4 had kind of somewhat run its course, right? It was brought around in the 1990s at North Dakota to stop the veer offense of North Dakota State in the Division two era. That UND NDSU rivalry flipped in about 1993 and went North Dakota's way until NDSU went to Division one in the early 2000s. And so, it was a staple of UND, and UND's defense really struggled the last few years, and I think a fresh start was something needed. And when Eric Schmidt left to join the Callan DeBoer coaching tree, got around Chuck Morrell, a guy who was kind of a 4-2-5 pioneer. And that was a defense they taught. He learned it there and said, "Well, that's what I'm bringing back to Grand Forks here." And so it's been an interesting transition because I felt like UND was always struggling to find that right nose guard body type to handle the 3-4, and then now you come in and you want two big body types on the defensive line. So UND's kind of going through that roster changeover right now, where little short on the big frames on the D line right now.
Well, when the last time UND had a coaching change when Bubba Schweigert took over, when Chris Mussman was let go, and then Schweigert came in, I remember talking to you years ago, and it was such a different sort of vibe, but also such a different style, right? Like Mussman liked these big receivers, he liked to throw the ball a lot. Schweigert, he wants to pound it, he wants the ball control. He's a defensive coach. Compare and contrast that same thing with Schweigert to Schmidt. Is it as much of an extreme, or is it more similar?
No, I think it's fairly similar. I think there's a lot of like modernizing to the process that Eric Schmidt has brought in, whether it's recruiting or the year-round calendar. I think he's just Eric Schmidt left and he saw it done at Fresno State and in Washington, and just kind of started to implement some of those things in Grand Forks that maybe were a little bit behind the times. And I think stylistically, I don't think people will see a massive change in terms of what UND does. I think Eric Schmidt has already targeted a little bit more of a longer body type, especially defensively. You're seeing, especially in the recruiting game that I follow in the 2026 class. It's a lot of 6'5" frames that look like they got lots of area to grow into. I think now that you don't have four linebackers running around, you're looking at finding a little bit more of those 6'4", 6'5" frames. And um, I don't think offensively they're going to be a ton different. They went from the offensive coordinator for the last handful of years with Bubba Schweigert was a guy named Danny Freund, who then left to go to South Dakota State and then went with Jimmy Rogers' staff to Washington State. And he was a little bit more on the imaginative, he had a little bit more of imagination with his offense, liked trick plays, liked running some quarterbacks at wide receiver. So he kind of got the offense a little funky, and then when he left to go to South Dakota State, UND brought in this guy by the name of Isaac Frichte, who's in his second year now, running the offense. And Coach Frichte is a little bit more traditional, but as I guess I witnessed at Kansas State, he really started to get a little trickier than I thought I saw a year ago. So it was interesting to see maybe his offense evolve, but maybe that's also a reflection of a new quarterback as well.
Well, let's talk about this UND team then. Tom Miller from the Grand Forks Herald talking North Dakota football. They are in Missoula to take on the University of Montana on Saturday afternoon. Um, Jerry Kaminsky, I mean, what a great Midwestern name. But he looks like a pretty efficient guy. I mean, the number one thing that stands out to me watching North Dakota last week against Portland State is just how much they seem to spread the ball around. I think they had 10 or 11 guys catch passes. So, what sort of style of quarterback is Jerry Kaminsky? And obviously, it seems like spread the ball around a little bit is sort of a key to what North Dakota wants to do offensively, at least early on here.
Yeah, a couple years ago, Kaminsky was the Wisconsin Offensive Player of the Year out of high school. He won the Dave Craig Award as the state's top quarterback in the state of Wisconsin. So he was a big recruit coming in. Was even, I mean, maybe a front runner of sorts to win the starting job at a fall camp last year when it ended up going to Simon Rumfo, a North Dakota kid. And I thought just a year ago, Jerry just wasn't quite seeing the picture play out in front of him very well. Was just a young kid. I think this year it started to slow down for him, and I wouldn't say that he dominated at fall camp by any means, but what I've noticed at Kansas State, and now I don't know what you can take away from UND and Portland State, but at Kansas State, I really noticed his poise, and confidence, and leadership. And I hate to use cliches, but it seemed like he had some of those gamer intangibles that you'd like to see in a quarterback. And he can run the football a little bit. I don't think it's that different than what Simon Rumfo brought to the table a year ago. Simon had some pretty impressive runs against Montana to mix into the run game. And right now, Kaminsky is UND's leading rusher on the season, which surprises me because I think that was an element of his game that we didn't really know about. That's something you don't really get to see in practice. You almost have to learn that in a game just because of the nature of practice. And so it's been interesting that Kaminsky has been very effective runner. I think just based off athleticism, I wouldn't say he's a dynamic runner, super explosive by any means. I just think he's been really athletic and making the right, choosing the right times to be effective with the run game.
A couple of people that I've talked to this week so far have also referenced North Dakota's offensive line and how stout and impressive it is. Tell us about that element of the team, and do you feel like that's one of their strengths offensively?
Yeah, 100%. I think the strength of the team is certainly the offensive line. And I credit a guy who came through Montana, Joe Pavlik,
Yeah,
came into North Dakota when their offensive line wasn't in the greatest place and just completely turned it around. Went after a lot of the right body types, got some good recruiting ground going in Iowa. Um, and I just think they were at a place coming in this year where they were seven strong along the offensive line, guys who I think could compete at a high-end FCS level, and they've lost one of them, a captain so far. He'll be out with injury here on Saturday, Caleb Olson. So now they're 60, but that's still a pretty good place to be. I think UND really lucked out in the sense that um, those guys all played last year, a year ahead of schedule. 2 years ago, UND lost Easton Kilty to Kansas State, Sam Hagan to South Dakota State, and Cade Borderud to Iowa. So they had this massive kind of changeover with offensive line, and these guys should have been sitting behind those guys. And so they got a chance to play. And because UND didn't win that many games last year, they didn't get any all-conference honors, and the FBS didn't come knocking down their doors. And so that happened to some of the FBS or some of the FCS schools around North Dakota here, where they lost a lot of the offensive line. So UND was able to maintain a bunch of that roster, and I think it's kind of a sneaky, really good group for UND this year.
you just mentioned it. North Dakota did not win that many games last year compared to like what people thought they were going to be early on because they had a good start. They beat Montana in Grand Forks. So, what was the things that ailed North Dakota last year, and how I'm sure that's been a motivating factor coming into this year, especially under a new head coach.
Yeah, boy, when UND, they didn't get thumped at Iowa State last year. It was like 21-3. And then they beat Montana with a big second half, and it kind of felt like UND was on a pretty good trajectory. But it actually just kind of ended up being what was the negative reputation of North Dakota across the last few years, and that's the fact that they developed a reputation for beating anyone in the country in the FCS in Grand Forks, and the ability to lose to anyone in the country outside of Grand Forks. UND didn't win a road game all of last year, and they haven't won a road game since they won at Murray State, which isn't the biggest feather in anyone's cap right now in the Missouri Valley. And so it was just UND has struggled to maintain program momentum. And when they beat North Dakota State a couple years ago, they went to Northern Iowa and got shut out. You beat Montana, and then you go on the road and you lose to Youngstown and Indiana State. Like those are things that just couldn't happen, and that ended up being the end of the Schweigert era. Was just an inability to win on the road, specifically at Indiana State. Really was a tough one, I think.
It seems though the talent there at North Dakota is superior to the actual accomplishments the last couple of years. I mean, would you say that's accurate? I mean, I know they were in the playoffs 2 years ago, so it's certainly pretty good. But it seems like the talent maybe is not aligning with the actual results, at least the last couple of years. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's pretty alarming. I think that you look around the area. South Dakota State's got how many guys in the NFL? North Dakota State has
Right.
how many guys in the NFL? UND doesn't have anybody in the NFL, and I don't, and I think that's a reflection of like, is North Dakota targeting the right guys? Is it the right body types? Are they developing them? No, I believe that UND is on the right path towards that end. The things that they've started to do in nutrition, hiring full-time nutritionists from Sanford nearby here. I think they're on a better path, but the fact that they just kept losing a pregame eye test, um, I think got glaring. And I don't know what their woes were exactly on the road, but between just not having guys that you were sending on to the pros and losing on the road, UND fans really felt like there was a plateau that had been reached. That I don't think UND fans were. It was nice that the Bubba Schweigert era elevated UND to this level of a team that kind of constantly scratch for 7 wins and could sneak into the playoffs. And I think fans are wanting more to see if it can rise above that.
Well, huge opportunity for UND then on Saturday in Missoula. Tom Miller, Grand Forks Herald, joining us to help preview this game. It's our ESPN Roundtable, probably presented by Stockman Bank of Montana. Stockman Bank, Montana's brand of banking. So, well, what's just your general vibe of this team coming in? I mean, they put a scare into Kansas State, who's a very good FBS team, and then they whipped up on Portland State, which I think part goes credit to UND, and also I think Portland State's in for a tough year, certainly. Um, what's sort of this the vibe of this UND team coming into Missoula to take on a Grizz team that they beat a year ago?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism and maybe like some surprised optimism. I think a lot of people came into this year seeing that um, a roster turnover that was going to have to take place in this new era was going to take time. And I don't think there were sky high expectations for year one of Eric Schmidt. And then they go to Kansas State and are 45 seconds away from a victory. Now, is Kansas State vulnerable? Were they just coming back from Ireland? I can appreciate that argument. I would say that UND started the season in 2022 against Nebraska, a team that was also vulnerable, also coming back from Ireland. So I've got a pretty good apples to apples comparison here. And UND just didn't have the juice in 2022 to really put a true scare into Nebraska like they should have. I felt like I saw a different vibe from North Dakota in Manhattan at Kansas State that I hadn't seen in the past. A confidence that I think is projected from their head coach a little bit. I think UND's going to Missoula, a confident team based on that Kansas State result. Um, and for me, the quarterback situation kind of ironing out is a big piece to that. I wasn't sure what UND would have, putting Jerry Kaminsky out there, who hadn't had a start yet in his college career. So answering some of those questions for me was very interesting. But for a team that hasn't won on the road in forever, it's kind of a unique big ask here to go win in Washington Grizzly Stadium.
What's it going to take? Is there any like sort of perception of the Grizz in the UND community just in terms of the crazy offseason that they've experienced? Because this has been among the most fascinating off seasons I've ever covered because they graduated, I think, 29 guys. They had another 15 guys that were expected to come back that didn't. However many transfer portal guys. I think it ended up about 10 guys hit the portal. Last week though, there was 54 guys that suited up for the Grizz had never suited up for the Grizz before in one capacity or the other. So do people have a comprehension of just how different this Montana team is than the one that North Dakota played and beat last year?
I that's a good question. I don't think they do. I think Montana just carries a reputation,
Right.
that comes without the year to year
Right.
following the in the weeds. So I think everybody's anticipating this to be a great challenge because I mean I've been to Montana how many times? I don't know if UND's ever even been in the ball game. One of the last times I was out there, UND had a couple injuries at quarterback and they had to trot out a kid who probably shouldn't have been put in that position and it just straight up avalanche. So, it's hard for me to even envision success in Missoula.
Right.
And I have to imagine that fans would feel the same way. Like it's hard to envision success when UND has struggled so much on the road, particularly in Missoula. I haven't seen it. I've seen it in Bozeman. UND have some success, but not Missoula.
Well, what do you think is then the measure of success on Saturday, and what's UND going to have to do to make it competitive or even spring a win?
Yeah, I think it's coach speak, but like UND has to limit big plays from Montana, make them drive the football. And then UND has to lean on, I think UND's got the opportunity to have an advantage on the offensive line. I think UND ran for like 245 yards last year, and it's a lot of the same guys. Simon Rumfo had a successful day rushing the football. He's now the third string quarterback. But I think the first two quarterbacks both could see the field and both will run the football. To me, it's got to come down to an ability to run the football and stick with that, and see how many drives you can finish off because UND's kicking game right now is a little questionable. They missed two kicks, including a 30-yarder against Portland State.
Tom Miller, Grand Forks Herald here on Nuanez now. Give people the website because I think there is a fair amount of Grizz fans that want to go read up a little bit about what's been going on there with UND football the last couple of weeks. How do people find your work online?
Yeah, they can either go to grandforksherald.com. I've got a UND football section on there, or they can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it. It's Tom Miller GF. And yeah, trying to follow along with Montana. I can always catch your voice when I listen to some press conference, so I always appreciate it. It was nice to hear some UND talk at Bobby Hauck's presser here. I still remember his quote from last year, Bobby Hauck, during last year's post game. He had he's kind of shaking his head saying UND just 3 yards every down, but 4 times 3 is 12.
Right.
It was he's got some good lines, even if he's a little pointed with some of them.
Indeed, it's true. Thanks for being here, buddy. Good to see you.
Absolutely.